Right there.
And how do you advance this?
Down here. Start getting the hit the cord.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. We are here to discuss the D2 Subway East End evaluation. Before we get started, I wanted to make a few announcements. Please help us by keeping yourself on mute during the entire meeting. We will have an opportunity to do a Q&A after the presentation. Please be sure also to drop any comments or questions you have into the chat, and we will address those after the presentation as well. So if you are on a call, please, we will unmute you after the presentation, or you can unmute yourself at that point by dialing *6. Now, we do want to make note that comments received during this meeting in the chat or verbally will be incorporated into the public record. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the DART website as well as the City of Dallas Transportation website after the meeting, and you'll be able to also provide input. If you don't want to share tonight, you can do that at a later time, and we will discuss all of that at the end of the presentation. So again, please make sure you mute yourself. I'm getting a couple of people in that are not muted, but tonight's presenters include representatives from the various agencies involved in the project. From the City of Dallas, we have Gus Concarly, Director of the Department of Transportation, and Catherine Rush, Chief Planner. From DART, we have with us Kay Shelton, Interim Vice President of DART Capital Planning. And from the North Central Texas Council of Governments, we have Sandy Wesh, Project Engineer. And we also want to thank all elected officials, executive staff, and board members that are also joining us tonight. Thank you all, as well as everyone else that's joining to be part of this process. And now we will hand it over to our presenters.
Good evening. My name is Gus Concarly. I'm the Director of the Department of Transportation, City of Dallas. First, I wanted to thank you for being here, and I want to thank our partnering organizations such as NCT COG, DART, TxDOT, and other agencies who are on the call. And more importantly, I want to thank you, our stakeholders, members of the public, who have helped us throughout this process and helped us in guiding this process to where it is today. D2 is really an important project that, along with the Interstate 345 and Interstate 30, could substantially change the core of Dallas and the region for generations to come. That is why when council members asked the staff for recommendation about whether to approve D2 back in January of 2021, we noted that there were some additional work and input from our stakeholders that needed to take place, and to address some of the concerns and the challenges that have been raised by our stakeholders, more specifically in the Deep Ellum and Good Latimer corridors, as well as the interface of with I-35. So back in March of 2021, the City Council took the action of approving the west end of the project and gave the agencies involved time with a maximum of a year to conduct further analysis and come up with solutions for the east end of the project. Since March of 2021, there has been dozens of discussions between city staff, DART, NCT COG, TxDOT, as well as members of the public and the stakeholders. We are here to present you the work that has occurred since then, alternatives that have been developed and refined to this point that were developed for the corridor, and the current results, and what we heard from the last public meeting. So the agenda for this evening, again, we're going to go through the background of the process, results of the second level screening, where we stand, what we found out, and the next steps. And then at the end, we'll like to go through the Q&A session and take any opportunities and provide any opportunities for comments. So with that, the meeting purpose is to provide the community an update on D2 and also the work that has taken place to get to this point, and to solicit any additional input that we may have that was not presented in the or received from the first meeting to this meeting, as well as the future path forward as we try to bring this process to conclusion. So the background on this, back in on March 24, 2021, the Dallas City Council resolution had several things outlined in that resolutions, including the two main ones. Number one is advance the D2 subway and set the alignment in Zone A, which is the western end of the alignment, and then directed city staff to work with DART, TxDOT, NCTCOG, and our stakeholders to evaluate project refinements, enhancements, and/or modifications in Zone B as needed to address and mitigate any technical, environmental, and alignment concerns. So we, as a team, developed the vision and the key issues for Zone B evaluation. The overall vision was based on looking at the D2 subway, 345, the local street network, and other infrastructure projects in coordination with the all in coordination with all the other efforts that are taking place as a system in that area. The objectives were to minimize any right-of-way needs or impacts, to maximize the economic development potential, reduce the potential for any what we call throwaway reconstruction of local streets, or any investments in Deep Ellum or any other part along that subway. Specifically, there has been several funds that have been allocated to investments in along that corridor, especially on the eastern end in the Deep Ellum area, and we wanted to make sure that whatever is done will not result in any significant impact to any improvements that will take place in the Deep Ellum area and other areas along the corridor. We wanted to also lessen the business, property, and travel impacts during construction. We heard that loud and clear, and especially with the potential impacts and timeline and schedules with all the activities that are taking place, again, in the Deep Ellum area, especially with having some current projects that will be getting off the ground in Deep Ellum that the city is leading the construction on. So there has been there are concerns on that, and we heard that loud and clear. The other vision that we incorporated was the opportunity to enhance the city grid and pedestrian network to reconnect neighborhoods, and that is in concert with the D2 and the 345 planning effort to ensure that those two projects, along with any improvements in Deep Ellum, allow us to reconnect the Deep Ellum to the downtown area and have a seamless transition and interface, if you will, between the two. And then last is maximize the experience for transit, bicycle, pedestrian, roadway, and freight and goods movement. In essence, we're looking at multimodal movements in accordance with our strategic mobility plan that was approved in the spring of 2021, so that we're catering for all modes of traffic and all modes of mobility within the city of Dallas that would cater to the users of our facilities. So along the way, what we have done we developed the process, and that process was previously published. We documented the key issues in the April-May timeframe. We developed evaluation processes and alternatives in the May-June timeframe. We had the public meeting in the July-August timeframe, where we presented the first level screening of alternatives and briefly discussed the second level screening of the alternatives in that timeframe. And then here we are this evening, basically to talk about what we have done since the public meeting and what we heard from the stakeholders and which alternatives that had received the most positive input and response to our first public meeting. So the evaluation process, we went through the first level screening, as I mentioned, was based on the evaluation of the vision, the project need and purpose. And we talked about on the first level, the design and the construction feasibility. Now, the second level screening, we delved a little bit more in depth into the community, economic and environmental effects, the transportation effects, the temporary construction impacts, the costs or funding and schedule, and the stakeholder supports, which, like I said, we received based on what we received since that public meeting, whether through the chat, through the formal responses, and through discussions, direct discussions with the stakeholders. So with that, I'll turn it over to our Chief Planner, Catherine Rush, to talk a little bit about the options that have been evaluated, and I will continue, and then we'll discuss the next steps where we go from here. Catherine?
Thank you, Gus. All right, so we had 8 alternatives options that we carried forward from the first level screening, and we wanted to kind of bring attention just a little bit here to option 3.1a. There was some slight revisions to it as a result of further sort of conceptual engineering work, and so the station was moved a little bit in the portal as well. Just wanted to flag that for everybody. That I believe engineering drawing will be posted or has been posted to the website already. Okay, so here's an overall table of the second level screening results, and a more detailed version of this we plan to post to the website, but just to give you a high level overview. To the left under alternatives, we have the 8 alternatives, and up above we have the various screening criteria that were used as part of the second level evaluation. So that includes everything like property impacts, the number of stations, economic development opportunities, rider impacts, cost, operating considerations, all of those sorts of things. And you can see at the very right, the one thing that we're missing is the stakeholder support and input. So we plan to collect that and fill that in after this public comment period. So to help orient you as to what the colors and everything means, so everything was compared to the baseline, which is the current federal environmentally cleared 30% design. And so a green is intended to be a positive comparison to that. Yellow is either relatively the same or neutral, and then orange, that's where it had some more problematic, potentially negative elements as part of it. And so at the left of this, we have tallied up how many green, yellow, and orange scores, how they scored under the various categories. And so from there, 3 roughly rose to the top as having the most green and yellow categories, and or the fewest orange categories. And so the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about more specifically those 3. So that is option 1-1, and this includes minor refinements to the locally preferred alternatives. Also positive, it would have minimal schedule delay, minimal D2 cost increase. However, neutral, it still has street grid issues similar to the current baseline. And on the negative end, the number of private property acquisitions required would be impacted, as well as the I-345 depressed option. It would not be able to gravity drain, which adds costs. For option 2-5, this one is a portal till roughly along Commerce, roughly till just west of I-345, then comes above ground. It would also have very minimal acquisition of property. It would work well with I-345, minimal cost increase. However, because of the distance from the transit mall, it would have more inconvenient transfers between the two lines. And it would also have traffic conflicts and longer travel times. Then finally, option 3-7A. This one keeps all of D2 in this area, in the downtown CBD, within the highways. Would have minimal acquisition of private property, minimal park impacts and the like. It would not cross I-345 and therefore would not have any impacts to it. It would have reduced train and traffic conflicts because it would all be underground in the CBD link, or in the CBD freeways. And it would also have convenient transfers because of the proximity between the existing Pearl station and the new sort of CBD East station. On the sort of neutral side, there would be some schedule delays, moderate D2 cost increase, and would require refinements or adjustments to the proposed FEIS, locally preferred alternative operating plan. Okay, now I believe handing it back over to Gus.
All right, thank you, Catherine. Basically, we want to talk about the next steps. So I just wanted to mention that based on the input that we received from the first public meeting, the most positive feedback that we received were in the family 3, and the highest positive response that we received was the 3-7A. So this evening's meeting and input will be taken into consideration, and we'll document any further stakeholder input and support for the preferred alternative that the stakeholders will select, and we'll have the most positive feedback. So once we compile this information, we'll meet with TxDOT, DART, and NCTCOG to develop the staff level recommendation. And we are planning on briefing our Dallas City Council Transportation and Infrastructure Committee on October 18th. And DART is planning on briefing their Planning and Capital Programs Committee on October 12th. And we will prepare the report to summarize the D2 East End evaluation effort. And if all goes as planned, we will develop the draft City Council resolution to be on City Council action at the earliest based on the city schedule. So with that, we'll turn it over to Hortensia to talk about how we're going to manage the Q&A and the opportunity for comments. Again, thank you so much for taking time from your busy schedule to attend this meeting and take active interest in this here, because this is very important and it will shape the city, the downtown, the downtown area and the Deep Ellum area for the city of Dallas here for years to come. So again, thank you so much for this opportunity. Hortensia.
All right, well, thank you, Gus. Okay, we will now open it to Q&A. Now, if you have a question, please be sure to drop it in the chat or raise your hand, and I will call on people as we go through the Q&A. So let us start with our first question. A guest says, is the alternative slides available online now during this meeting? So we do have some, there is information posted on the website currently for from August 5th's meeting, and that includes some of the slides from the discussions previously. We will be posting tonight's meeting, including the presentation, tomorrow, and so you'll be able to access that tomorrow. Now, we also have a comment period open through October 6th, so if you want to make a formal comment or provide feedback, you must submit it to d.planning@dallascityhall.com or mail it in to the Department of Transportation, care of D2 Subway at 1500 Murillo Street, L1BS, Dallas, Texas 75201. Now, it's very important to get that in by October 6th if you'd like to be considered in this formal feedback for this project. We have a few more questions. Would it be possible to display the 3 alternatives map again during this Q&A? So if we can get that back on the screen, that would be great. Okay. Okay, so someone else says it would be helpful if you could put up the 8 alternative slide for now for reference. Okay. Okay. So we have. Let me go with Luther Harris first, and then Matt Craig. I believe you had your mic unmuted, so we'll go with you next. But Luther Harris says, it looks like one of those maps that there are a few places, the end station near I-345. It was also mentioned that the placement of the transit center was a big factor in where the station was placed. Why can't the transit center be moved?
Handing this over to Kay.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Good evening, and thanks for attending. So I'll answer that question about the CBD East station location and our East Transfer Center property. So part of it is we wanted to minimize private property impacts and take advantage as much as we can of the property that is owned by DART or by TxDOT or by the city. So that's one reason why we wanted to use that property. If we were to move it, then we'd probably have to acquire private property elsewhere. One of the other main reasons why we located it there was just proximity to our existing Pearl Arts District station, which provides for an easy transfer for passengers. And also, as we were laying out the alignment, every station needs to have a flat spot, basically, level area. And so it worked out that that was a good location as we're coming up from being deep under Commerce Street to have a flat spot for the station and then start rising up again to get back up to grade further up the line. So those were the primary reasons.
Okay. All right, so Matt Craig, did you have a question? You're able to unmute yourself at this point if you do.
No question, sorry, that was just by accident.
Okay, no question for Matt. Okay, do we have anyone else who'd like to come? Okay, we have a few more comments coming in. Luther Harris says, would D2 be built at the same time as I-345?
So this is still under consideration. One of the key thing is, like we mentioned, is that there will not be any throwaway items. So if that section or a section of D2 needs to be constructed as part of 345, then that would be given a consideration, definitely consideration for that. So.
Okay, great. Audrey and Michelle say, do all of the options include putting 345 underground and rejoin Deep Ellum to East Quarter?
TxDOT is currently handling the public input on the 345, and they're considering all the options, and the one of the options that they considered or was included in the consideration is a depressed 345. The current D2, at least one of the alternatives in the Family 3 that we presented tonight will most likely will not interfere with 345, and therefore that gives TxDOT the ability to continue their process and present whatever alternatives they have, whether being elevated or at grade or depressed. So it does not preclude any of the alternatives that TxDOT is currently working on.
Okay, Stephanie Hudeberg of Deep Ellum Foundation, you're up next.
Okay, good evening and thank you. My name is Stephanie Hudeberg. I'm the Executive Director of the Deep Ellum Foundation. And first and foremost, I just want to express my thanks to the Dallas City Council for their leadership in moving to reevaluate the LPA to ensure that it aligns with the comprehensive vision for the future of the City of Dallas. I want to thank Gus and your entire team at the Transportation Department at the City of Dallas for your diligence, your creativity, your communication, and really your intentionality and community engagement especially. I know this has been a long process, and you will have really kept at it. I want to thank Michael Morris and his team at the North Central Texas Council of Government, DART, TxDOT, and all the agency partners. Deep Ellum is at the center of many of the transportation planning efforts, innovation opportunities, and challenges that we face as a city. The Good Latimer Corridor in particular in Deep Ellum is emerging as a gateway from the Arts District, East Quarter, and downtown to Deep Ellum and East Dallas. It's something where with smart investments like Carpenter Park, like our Dallas Cultural Trail that we're planning along the Good Latimer Corridor, I think we have potential to really weave these districts back together. The D2 project, as previously configured, severely interrupted that potential. So we're incredibly grateful for this process. I would like to share that after careful consideration, many questions and conversations, the Deep Ellum Foundation, our board, and our Good Latimer Committee are in support of option 37A. We believe this option best coincides with the city's overarching planning across systems, including 345 all the way down to street connectivity and neighborhood connectivity. We believe it best positions us to weave neighborhoods back together, maintain or enhance our connectivity, as well as avoid the negative impacts specifically to Deep Ellum. So once more, we just want to share our thanks. We look forward to this process moving forward, hearing from other communities, other stakeholders, and ultimately making the best decision for Dallas and the region, as well as the neighborhoods most impacted like Deep Ellum. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Stephanie. Next we have J.R. Sue, who asks, how would option 37A affect light rail service during subway construction?
Gotta unmute me. Okay, so thanks for the question. So to be determined really until we actually do a little more design and look at the construction impacts. But the way that 37A, the concept is on paper right now is that it would be grade separated from the current tracks at our, what we call our southeast junction. And so there would need to be some temporary facilities put in place and bridging to be able to minimize the impact to light rail operations. And a lot of it is actually being built kind of off to the side and around it. And so we think that we can put in some temporary structures to minimize that during construction, but that's something we'll continue to look at. And I think that would be the focus of any contracting approach to this option in that area. So hope that helps.
Okay, great. Next we have Joel Michael. Beyond the next step slides, is there an anticipated schedule or time frame for construction?
Okay, so anticipated schedule. So right now in the DART financial plan, D2 has about a 2028 revenue service date. If we make a change on this part of town, then we need to do some additional work, and that could take a year or two to do that. So there could be a slight delay in the project from our current revenue date, but still within the time frame of the project being needed for downtown Dallas. So there might be a slight impact, but we want to continue to move the project forward as planned. So hope that helps.
All right, so Luther Harris asks, what does the underground of downtown Dallas look like in all of these light rail proposed sections? Are there underground tunnels there already, or is there a lot of utility lines Does this type of soil have a factor in where the light rail is placed?
So it varies. We've done some geotechnical baseline reporting and some borings through downtown. And so the soil conditions really vary throughout downtown as you go from west to east. On the west, it's not as great and it gets better as you continue east. But we have done quite a bit of research on that. And that helps define the construction approach throughout different parts of downtown. And where we are in good rock, we can mine through that, but where it might not be so great, we might have to do more cut and cover type of construction. We also, in terms of like underground utilities and pedestrian tunnels, we've looked at all of that. The way the project is designed right now, there are no conflicts with any of the pedestrian tunnels. They're in a few different locations, but we don't conflict with any of them. There will be utility impacts, and so we've been working closely with utilities over the last several years through the planning process to determine where those critical ones are so that we can at least flag those and start working early on potential utility relocations before the project starts construction. So there's a lot underground, and a lot of it we don't know about yet, but that's the part of final design. Once we get into that, we'll get a lot more detail on the underground conditions.
So we have Randy Hinkle asks, are there any updates with FTA approvals to move to final engineering?
Yeah, so we have been working very closely with FTA, and so concurrent with this process, we've been working with them to get into the next phase of their grant program, and it's called engineering. One of the things that we need to determine before getting into engineering is, are we making a change on this end of the project? And if we are, we'll have to work with FTA and the local stakeholders in the city to do more design work and to clear this segment environmentally, and that has to be done before we can move into the next phase. And so that's when I mentioned that we'll have more work to do if a change is made. We have to do that work. It might take a year or so to do before we can make that request to enter the engineering phase. So we're continuing to work with them on that, but again, until we know what we're doing and we get direction from the Dallas City Council and the DART board, we're continuing to advance the project we have. And if there's a change, then we'll just pivot from that point and adjust our schedule as needed.
Okay, we have Audrey Mitchell asking or saying, I understand why the 37A would be the easiest and most cost effective, but we need some closer rail or trams around the farmers market area. Is that something that can happen in the future?
The right button. Okay. There. Sorry, I had to unmute. So I think from a tram or rail perspective, I think I'll point out a couple of things. One, we have a new bus network redesign happening, and I know there's a lot of emphasis on enhancing bus service, which is an important part of our transit system too. There's also been talk about expanding streetcar in the future within downtown Dallas, and so that presents an opportunity as well. So I think keep those two things in mind. It might not be a light rail investment down in that area. And, you know, previously when we looked at different D2 options, we actually had some alignments further down there towards Farmers Market, but there's not a lot of right of way down there without impacting some of the residential development. So I think that bus improvements and potentially streetcar is something to look at in the future for that area. Anything you want to add to that, Gus? Okay.
Okay, we have G. Marcos saying, so are option 1-1, option 2-5, and option 3-7A the only alignments being seriously considered moving forward?
I think at this point, yes, they rose to the top in the evaluation. So unless there is something new that comes through the stakeholder input process that might change the evaluation or the thoughts on some of the other ones, but those are the ones really that fared well against the criteria that we kind of set forth to achieve that vision that Gus laid out earlier in the presentation. So that is our focus right now is primarily to get some feedback on those in particular.
Brad Martin says, the new station on 378 is a long way from the farmer's market side of downtown. Okay, we have a couple questions from Luther Harris. The area in Deep Ellum seems to be the most affected by the possible light rail coming through, as it seems it takes a little more land. How does DART plan to reduce the impacts in businesses? Would DART maybe consider possibly letting businesses or apartment building foundations on top of the light rail, like how the convention center is over Botham Jean, to make sure land is saved?
So I think you're referring to air right opportunities, and you might be referring to as well to option 1-1, which is the one that affects the most property. And so that is a consideration if that one did continue to move through the process. That's our current project design, that we've always thought there are opportunities to develop air rights over it and work with developers to develop around it to minimize impacts. But you know, because of the way the alignment connects into the green line, there would be permanent impacts to some of the businesses. It's just something we would have to do to actually build the project. So there would be some permanent impacts, but there's still opportunities, I think, with any of these to maximize development around and over the light rail system.
Okay, J. Arzu asks, or has a comment, says 3-7A seems like a safe and effective alternative. Dev Rastagi asks, is there, I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, asks, is there no build option being considered?
So in the environmental impact statement, there was a no build alternative considered, and the approval and what the agency selected was the project, the option 1-1, and the baseline project that we talked about tonight. So it doesn't mean that the DART board and the city council could go through this process and say, maybe we don't want to build the project, but right now it's an important part of the investment in public transit for the city and for the region. And so I think we're still proceeding that with a build alternative, and we're just trying to go through this process to figure out what that best option is to address some of the concerns on the east end of town.
Okay, those are all the questions in the chat. If you still have any comments you'd like to make, please be sure to drop those in. If anyone would like to speak, please tell me in the chat that you would like to speak, because I'm not able to see right now the raised hands. So I don't see any. And also for our callers, you're able to unmute yourself by dialing *6. So at this point, if you'd like to do that, please do so.
You want me to move it to that last comment slide?
Okay, that's all the comments and questions we have for today. Please be sure, again, if you do have anything else you'd like, oh, I'm sorry, we have something that just came in. Approximately how many people are affected by this project?
And I guess I don't understand quite what and if it's businesses or parcels that are impacted specifically. It depends on what we select. Ultimately, our current project, for example, that we have defined in our EIS, I think impacts about 40 different private property parcels on the east side of town. So some of the other alternatives impact less. If you're talking about riders and people that use the system, you know, it's thousands, right? Because this is going to change the way people travel and use the system through downtown. So, you can look at it in a couple different ways, but from an impact perspective, we want to try to minimize the impacts, and that's why we're going through this process.
Okay.
Brad Martin says, I believe the disruptions to businesses and residents during construction should take a backseat to the long-term benefits to the city. Has there been a projection of what those impacts might be, in particular to Deep Ellum? I'm sorry, I'm trying to read that.
Again, can you restate it, or I'll try to find it?
Just restate.
Okay, once again, I believe the disruptions to businesses and residents during construction should take a backseat to the long-term benefits to the city. Has there been a projection of what those impacts might be, in particular to Deep Ellum?
Well, when we did the environmental impact statement, we assessed the impacts and documented all of those impacts to the Deep Ellum area. So they are documented in our environmental impact statement, and I think that was one of the concerns from the community were things related to the property impacts, business displacements, some of the traffic concerns along Good Latimer, as you've heard them talk about. So, and some of those things run counter to the strategic plan of Deep Ellum. So that's why we're here. We want to try to see if there's a better option out there. Hopefully that answers your question.
Todd Plesko asks, can you explain the impact of the change in the LRT operating plan for the option 378?
Yes, so I don't think we have a map of that in the presentation, but I believe we can add that to the website. But so 37A, what it does, because it grade separates the tracks over on the east side of downtown, results in some benefits by reducing conflicts, but it also removes the physical connection of the green line from the southeast corridor to the D2 corridor. So the green line would continue to operate as it does today down the transit mall, but instead of turning north towards the northwest corridor in the medical district, it would turn south in downtown and continue towards the UNT Dallas station. So it changes up a little bit. Oh, slide 22. Sorry, we do. Someone's telling me it's in the back here, so I'm gonna go forward. I don't think it's the operating plan map, but it gives you an idea of kind of physically how it would work. So, so the blue and the orange lines that you see there, that is coming from the north. Oh, sorry, I'm getting a bad network quality. So blue and orange in the case of 37A would use the D2 corridor. So those lines coming from the north, blue coming from Garland and Rowlett, orange coming from the Plano area, would exit the tunnel, and then it would go into the tunnel that exists today. It would come up slightly, and then it would dive into another subsurface configuration and pass under the tracks that you see there where the red and green are shown. So when the blue and the orange get on D2 and travel through downtown, when they get to the Commerce, West End, and Victory area, they both turn north. So the orange line will continue to the airport like it does today, and the blue line today actually turns south and goes to UNT Dallas station. It will now be forced to turn north and go up to Carrollton. What that means then is the green line stays on the current mall with the red line. And so you don't need to build the Y connection. You don't have to cross 345. And the green now is the one that would travel down to UNT Dallas. So it changes up our operating plan somewhat so that you basically have sort of an upside down U with the green line, the way it would operate, and then a regular U, right, for the blue line from Rowlett and Garland to Carrollton. So that means that there might be more transfers system-wide for people that might be using the green line and today get to travel to the medical district without a transfer. They might have to transfer. Now, one of the benefits of D2 is that it adds the ability for DART to plan for long-term service improvements. And so you can still layer in additional service with any D2 option, including this, where you can still make some of those direct connections that people have today that might be different. One of the other benefits of this in terms of the way it's configured at this part of downtown is that because the lines are now grade separated from each other and you have blue and orange below the green line there, it reduces the conflicts It also reduces conflicts for automobile traffic that uses that Ruth Good Latimer connection and Cesar Chavez in the area. And it creates the opportunity for a connection between Pearl and the CBD East station there that you can see on that map. The other benefit that we saw was that Blue Line riders, for example, that would use D2 have direct access to the medical district now. So we saw a boost in some of the ridership, and there's benefits for them. So there are an overall slight increase in transfers that we might see, but there's people that benefit and there's people that are inconvenienced. And I think the goal under this would that we'd have to design it in a way to minimize that and to be able to layer in service to still meet some of the travel needs of our riders.
Luther Harris asks, which alternative has the least impact?
Sorry. Yeah. Well, it depends on what you're looking at, what impact you're looking at. They all have trade-offs, and I think we've always said amongst ourselves too that none of them are perfect. So you can't really plan for perfect. You have to kind of plan for what makes the most sense for the community. So you know, it again depends on what you're looking at from an impact standpoint. Some of them have fewer property impacts than others, and some of them have fewer transfer impacts to others. So it really depends, and I think part of what might be useful for everyone to look at is when we do post that evaluation table tomorrow, you can take a look at that and really see a little bit in more detail what the trade-offs are amongst some of them.
Brad Martin makes a comment, says Deep Ellum favors 3-7A. G. Marcos asks, wouldn't option 37A preclude the rerouting of the Orange Line to Longview for a possible future expansion to Masters Drive along Syene Circle, Highway 352, that has been outlined in previous DART transit plans?
No, it wouldn't preclude that. I think if it was, it could be a different colored line. It could be the purple line or the turquoise line, but anything that still uses our transit mall has the ability to continue in that direction and go out towards Longview. So I don't think it would preclude that. It just might mean that it wouldn't use the D2 corridor, it would use the surface transit mall.
Okay, Richard Schumacher asks, in 37A, could there also be an underground green line connection to D2, a second underground Y? But then he says that would be another surface Y with another portal, actually.
I think we looked at some of those things, and it's really difficult to make it work. It also starts to get into the 345 options, and there's really limited windows to make some of those connections just because of the grades we're at and the depths we're at. So it's really not possible, and we looked at one of those options early on.
Luther Harris asks, why can't there be a right turn of D2 to the green line?
I'm like, a right turn. So I think primarily if we were at surface, then we could, but what you see on the screen right now where the blue and the orange lines are is probably about 30 feet down, and the green line is at surface level, and you just don't have enough distance to make a turn and get back into that corridor. With our design criteria. So that we looked at that. We tried to figure out a way, is there something you maybe could even do later? And maybe later on when 345 is under construction and we look at this again in the context of new conditions, we might be able to find a connection. But right now it's just something that's pretty difficult to do.
So Luther Harris asks, I was at a different public meeting where someone who worked at DART told me that on the west side of D2, there was a property that the agency wanted that would allow them to build a track to make a right turn from the green-orange lines to D2. If blue changes track there, does that mean that DART got the property?
So I think, oh, sorry. So I think that what you're referring to is the ability to have a full Y connection both directions up in the Victory area. Right now, there's only a connection to the north. We still would like to see if there's an opportunity to get that connection to the south, but I think that the blue line probably wouldn't use that. It would be more of a non-revenue track for incidents and incident management. I think we have some maps of that we can post on the website as well for people to see. So blue line would continue north in our current configuration with 37A and wouldn't use that. It's kind of a sharp turn, and I don't think that would be used for regular revenue service. So we don't have the property yet, but it doesn't mean that we won't maybe look at that as a consideration as we get further in design.
All right, well, thank you everyone for all these questions. And again, we want to repeat the information for sharing your feedback, asking more questions or providing more comments on this topic at the following: d.planning@dallascityhall.com or by mail at Department of Transportation, care of D2 Subway, 1500 Marilla Street, L1BS, Dallas, Texas 75201. So those are the two ways you can submit feedback to be included in the project record. And so again, we will be posting this presentation and meeting recording to the dart.org/D2 website and also to the City of Dallas Department of Transportation website under projects. And so we thank you once again for joining us today. And we appreciate everything you have done to help us through this process. Thank you all. Have a good evening.